So I'm delighted to have we're delighted to have a really good panel here today, coming from different areas. So I'll just very briefly introduce them. So we have Emma Kinsella here. Emma is head of the Skills Unit and Enterprise Engagement Unit in our department, which is for higher education, further education, higher education, innovation and science. It's a very long title for a ministry, DeFerris by short. Thanks a million, Emma. Taelo, or TJ you prefer, who has facilitated the last workshop as well. You're very humble and modest in your description about yourself, a learner, a teacher, and a technophile. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. As well, we've Brian O'Mahony, who's head of sales with Roffey Park, Europe, and we have Daniel Mccrea, who's head of partner services with Adaptemy. So as I mentioned, we've various questions to get through. I feel incredibly old school, a bit like a Luddite, because I've written down the questions. We've been talking about technology and AI all day, but I've written down questions just to remind me myself. So we've talked a lot today about uncertainty and skills and upskilling and embracing technology. So Emma, I'm going to start with you. And in your opinion, what do you consider to be the fundamental skills that learners need to develop in this unscripted world, and to what extent can formal education help learners foster those skills?
Okay, so to take your first part, Ciaran, of your question, I think there are two types of skills really that we're looking at. So there's a sort of the technical skills that people who are in this room today will be very familiar with, and adapting to new technology, to sustainable education and so on. And then there are the differentiators, so the human skills, the creativity, the learning how to learn, and I think that is the key. So from my perspective, one of the things that I'm responsible for is lifelong learning, and really the key piece about future-proofing is giving people that ability to learn and that thirst to learn and embedding that. So there's that piece. And I think then as a system, how we do that is by going out to people and helping them to find a pathway that suits them, to find a flexible way of learning, to find a navigable way of learning. And there's a lot of work that has been done actually in the last couple of years on this. So I'm thinking about things like the e-college platform, which is sort of online learning. I'm thinking about things like microcreds, which are short, stackable interventions. I'm thinking about things like the National Enterprise Hub. So that basically brings together supports for enterprise, but also gives them information about where they can go to help get their staff trained. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this space, but it's really all about trying to bring that culture, I suppose, together, so that people feel supported on their learning journeys and on a learning journey that's right for them.
When you're talking about like two types of skills, I think in many ways sometimes the technical skills are perhaps easier to operationalize, to teach, to assess as well. Taelo, can I ask you then, as regards like on the other side, the human skills, the 21st century skills, my job we call them transversal skills, but essentially they're the same set of skills. How can formal education go about trying to foster them in their learners, in their students or graduates?
Thank you so much. It's an important question to ponder upon, and I think the first thing to mention would be how important lifelong learning as a skill is on its own. So really inculcating that desire to learn, that need for not just consuming knowledge, not just imbibing everything that's being thrown at you, but questioning, being really critical about the information you decide to consume. So as the first point, just thinking about how to get our learners, our students in higher education to develop that love, genuine love for learning. That's where it all starts. But going back to the soft skills and talking about critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, collaboration, getting people in general to see those skills as the basis for learning. I think most of the times, and I mentioned this in the workshop earlier, we really tend to fixate on technicalities. We really tend to focus on the technical aspects. When we talk about AI, most of the conversations that you hear are about how much we've progressed, how much AI has grown exponentially, how much data went into training this model and that model. What you rarely hear about is conversations around humanity and human-centered design. Design, I think, goes beyond just having a static educational system that does not acknowledge, the changing landscape. Humanity-centered design fosters a need to iterate over time, to go back to your learners, to your students, and ask them, how can we make you feel genuinely that you matter? I think it goes back to that. And as soon as we have the infrastructure, understanding the importance of mattering, understanding the importance of going back to human elements as opposed to fixating on technical aspects, that's where the crux, I think, is. And that's how our systems will, over time, solve many of the problems that we've tackled for a long period of time.
So then I think the challenge then very often is for educators. So we talk about what skills students require, but then the next question, Brian, really is around, okay, if we identify the skills that learners need, what are the skills that educators need to develop and apply in order to ensure that happens? Because that is a vulnerable space for educators.
I think there's 3 or 4 key things in this. I think, first of all, there's a mindset required to say that the traditional methods are to be respected. We're not throwing the traditional methods out the door and saying we can't use them anymore. It's how do we build upon the traditional methods with new methods and leverage technology to actually help. I think the first thing for me, and I've a niece and nephew who recently started university, and seeing how they learn has actually completely changed my mind on this, and that there's an expectation of them for their professors and doctors and people teaching them that there's a digital fluency and a technological fluency in sometimes people who are a lot older than them, and it's not a nice to have if they understand the technological side of things. They have to understand them as far as they're concerned, and that isn't something, being a little bit older as I am, would expect of someone teaching me, but they just think it's built in. And in fact, what one of them said to me was they expect the people teaching them to be ahead of them technologically. So this, whether it's surprising them or maybe bringing in a new tool they haven't heard of, which again, I think is a complete generational shift. I think the second thing, I think it's really, really important for people to be aware of how this can be part of the old and part of the new, is that kind of critical thinking skills are required, obviously of learners, but the teachers and facilitators of learning have to understand that they need to think differently in order to educate in a different way. And they can't just do what they've always done and hope to get different and better results. I think the final part, and again, this is built in for a younger generation, but maybe isn't for people of my age, is that there's that social learning piece where people are learning from each other. There's those support structures within networks of learners, I think is so, so important. And again, if you're the person at the front of the class who's lecturing, or the one with, in inverted commas, knowledge that people don't have in the room, I think that separates you from the learners. And so the more you're part of the learning experience as a teacher or a facilitator, and the more you understand the network in the room in front of you, and the more that you're actually having conversations and dialogue with the people in the room rather than doling out knowledge, I think being open to that different way of learning actually can make a huge difference.
And so if, let's say, an educator acknowledges that they need to upskill or change how they approach the learning experience, where would they go for that typically? Do you think, is it all internal within their institution, so they go external? And this is open to everyone. I mean, you speak, but everyone can obviously contribute.
One thing I would say about it, and obviously the other guys can come in this, I think teachers and facilitators sometimes underestimate the network of like-minded people that they have. Sometimes teaching can be a relatively lonely job in that you're the one at the front of the room, but actually there are support networks within that people are learning from. And again, from my own point of view, when I facilitated, sometimes it takes a peer to unlock that, and that I've tried this and it worked, or sometimes I've tried this and it didn't work, but here's what I've learned from it.
And Daniel, thoughts on how educators can upskill themselves either within their institution, externally, in order to be in a position that they can actually ensure that their students, their learners, are developing those skills?
Well, if I could reject the premise. So one of the things you've said is, we heard a little bit about inertia and reluctance to change and the demand for upskilling. That notion to me presumes the idea that traditional methods of teaching and adaptive or AI-powered or personalized are mutually exclusive. And in fact, in quite a few of our implementations, actually, we have this parallel teaching experience where we have the lecturer is able to deliver the courses as they know it works, they have done it, they're comfortable with it, they're confident with it. And then in parallel, the students have a more personalized, self-directed, adaptive experience. So those two things are not necessarily mutually exclusive, and it does help mitigate that skills gap, that inertia that sometimes you find in more established teaching methodologies.
And so when you're talking, I think in terms of education, obviously I'm in higher education, and one of the kind of the major trends is around, well, there's diversification, so there's organizations who've no historical footprint in the sector becoming very active. But another really major trend is around personalization, which I know is a space that you're very, very active. Can you just talk a bit around how the concept of, like, I think Anne was talking about hyper-personalized, or someone was talking about hyper-personalized learning journeys, what that means, what it looks like, what are the barriers to it, are people very open to it, and what the advantages of it might be?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and to pick up on your point, TJ, the human dimension, so artificial intelligence really reaches its apotheosis when it successfully mimics or copies human intelligence. So AI is one of the litmus tests of the benchmarks for a successful AI solution is how well can it mimic an excellent human? So then the question becomes, what are the excellent qualities of a teacher that we're seeking to mimic? So in the first instance, domain knowledge. So if you were teaching somebody something, you need to know your subject matter. Now, ChatGPT and large language models have done a great job of modeling, consolidating, making that information retrievable. The second dimension of being an excellent teacher is understanding your students. And that's where this kind of idea of adaptive and personalized learning comes in. So we supplement the subject matter knowledge model with a very rich model of the learner. So what do they know, what do they not know? Really accurate mastery estimation. What are their learning traits? Are they very self-directed? Are they confident? When they experience a challenge, is it motivating or is it terrifying? So personalized adaptive systems seek to model the learner, their proclivity to forget. These are all of the things that our systems model about the learner, and then we combine that with a subject domain to create this highly personalized experience. My head of research, long-suffering, humored me recently. So our system effectively ingests learner data from a platform, we model it, and then we send out personalized learning path recommendations, personalized content recommendations, real-time feedback, data and analytics to the lecturers so that they can get closer to their students. So I asked her, and she humored me as often she has to, how personalized are the recommendations in the system? Like, how unique are the learners? How unique are the models? So within, I think, 26 minutes of learning, the learner models are 98% distinct. So what that means is very rapidly, these systems hyper-personalization, you can call it. Very rapidly, they create completely unique learner profiles and start delivering completely unique learning experience, as unique as the students who are sitting in your classrooms and taking these courses.
And can I ask then, let's say the learning experience is highly personalized, which there's massive advantages in that. How does that reconcile then with the concept of standardized assessment perhaps, or is there, or does it negate the concept of, does it push back against standardized assessment in a course or module with learning outcomes, or how does it relate to that?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So typically the approach is that we anchor the learning design of the courses in standardized outcomes. So we have this, maybe to use a metaphor, we have a goal towards which all learners must reach. There is a final assessment. In professional learning, it might be a training certification. In the university context, it might be interim exams or terminal exams. They are the anchor points that govern the learning path recommendations towards which all students are moving. Now, every learner, how did they get there? Every learner has such diverse knowledge gaps and backgrounds. They have such diverse traits. They have good days, right? They have bad days. You can't have a system that punishes them for bad ones and rewards them too strongly for good ones. So the goals remain ultimately the same in terms of terminal assessment. The method about how you get there, that's where the uniqueness comes in.
Okay. And TJ, you mentioned human-centered design, and Daniel, you made a very valid point around, it's not a crude dichotomy, one or the other. It's not an adversarial polarity. And yet the question does emerge, the relationship between the human and technology. How do we harness and maximize the affordances of humans and technology in a learning environment? What are your thoughts and perspectives on that?
Yes, I think you made a very good point there to say that the relationship is not adversarial. So it begins with that. It begins with understanding that there's great opportunity really for collaboration. One of the things I've been thinking about, or one of the ideas I've been toying about for some time, is this idea of having, and it goes back to the point of personalization, having personalized tutors for learners, and that's what my PhD is on, trying to see how we can, deploy AI systems ethically, yes, of course. Also looking at how they can supplement or complement, rather, the work done by teachers. So it begins with teachers and learners seeing these systems as helpers. They're not there to replace anyone. They're not there to, drastically change the way things have been done. If anything, they are there to ensure that you perform at your most optimal level. If you go back to when, and this is the argument that's normally presented, to say when the calculator was first introduced, we couldn't imagine a world where you didn't do computation in your own mind. But once we adapted to it, once we started getting used to using it, once we started seeing the affordances, the benefits of having an assistant computer, an assistant logical partner, then we found a way of integrating it into our daily lives. So I think it begins with literacy. I'm developing a course at the moment, just to make an example. I'm working with Trinity under Trinity Access Programs and Scholars Ireland to develop a course for high school students on AI literacy. And one of the things we're looking at is not just how to deploy the AI system or how it can help with homework, is to also look at the disadvantages of deploying these AI systems. What does it take to develop an AI model? we have for so long spoken about the advantages. I think it's high time we start balancing those conversations by addressing some of the challenges as well in developing these AI tools. So what we're trying to do with the course is to get students to understand AI, get students to think about AI as a companion, get students to also see what's been spoken about in terms of the huge amounts of data, energy, water that goes into developing these AI systems. A question was asked earlier about the environmental impact of AI, and it's huge. It is huge. And I think it's important that we have everyone, including our learners in high school, understanding the impact of it so that when they move forward as well, they start making those decisions with that understanding. So going back to your question, it begins with literacy. It begins with having such conversations, getting together and initiating the conversations and challenging the answers that we get from each other.
And you mentioned challenges there. I think one of the assumptions that today has been that everyone has equal access to technology, and we all have access to Wi-Fi or good broadband or whatever the case might be. But I imagine that isn't the case all the time. What's your perspective on how we can bridge that kind of digital divide? Or not anyone on the panel add to that? I'm interested.
I'm so passionate about that question, so I'm going to chip in just now. I'd like to start with the disparities between the global north and the global south. Just to give some context, I'm from South Africa, and I was just having conversations earlier on about my concerns about the global disparities between these two geographic locations. So Strive Masiwa, the CEO of Econet, said something that made an indelible impression on me when he had an interview with Google. He said, "We don't want to be users any more than we want to be used. We want to fully participate in the economic opportunity that this era of AI has heralded." And I think it encapsulates an important point in that if we ever want to make sure that we don't exacerbate any social justice issues, we have to go back and address these infrastructural issues. Yes, most of these countries in the global south are making a way to ensure that they are also in the race for developing AI systems that solve their contextual problems. But I think if we really want to, as a global community, tackle these issues more efficiently, more effectively, we have to work together. No more can you talk about a world where certain countries work alone in silos and leave others behind. So I think to address those disparities, to go back and address the social, environmental issues, we really have to collaborate, even in universities, working interdisciplinarily to face these challenges head on. And I think it goes back to the issue of humanity. Deploying AI systems wrapped and infused in humanity, understanding that these systems at the end of the day will be used by humans. So having those humans have a say in how these AI systems are deployed will help us address some of those challenges. So that's to say you cannot take a system that was developed in a Eurocentric context with European laws and deploy it in an African context in the rural enclaves, for example, of Rustenburg, where I'm from. You have to take into account what the people of that area think. What values do they espouse? Do not just disregard what they think about technology. Do not take for granted what they know about technology or how they can help in shaping or refining your design process. That's how you address those disparities, by involving the humans who at the end of the day will be using the systems you design.
I think in many ways that kind of resonates with the idea Richard was talking of empathy this morning and adopting multiple or diverse perspectives. And Brian, like in your role, I mean, do you come across those type of questions as well, and challenges?
Yeah, and I think the challenge we see in a kind of adult learning context is that I always think everyone comes to our classrooms or virtual classrooms thinking they've got a set of challenges that nobody else could possibly understand. And 5 minutes in, you realize pretty much everyone's having the exact same types of challenges. They're the core challenges that every person and organization has. They're around communication, decision-making, problem-solving. And again, I'm not trying to kind of dumb down my entire career, but those are the things that if you get them right as an individual and as an organization, you're on the right path. And I think the challenge and opportunity with AI, and we saw it today in so many different ways, is that I'm obsessed with time. So when I think, okay, this is going to take me an hour to complete this, I think, okay, if AI can give me a head start in the first 5 minutes and get me to a point where it saves me 15, 20 minutes, I'm going to go for it. It doesn't mean it's doing the job for me. It doesn't mean it's of the quality in and of itself that it would be if I'd done it all myself. But the 15 or 20 minutes or 30 minutes that I'm spending making it better with my own mind, that's how I'd like to translate it into our classrooms, is that it's something that's going to be a support structure to the learning, but it's not the learning in and of itself. And the other part of it for me, and it's how I've started to use it more and more, and we had a real great discussion at our table a few minutes ago, is that what I've started to use it for, and I know a lot of our facilitators do the same, is that if they're putting together a learning design, they'll do it as normal. And ChatGPT is almost a check at the end. Have I missed something? Have I spent too much on one part of it? So it's almost like an end point rather than a start point sometimes. So it kind of allows you to check your work a little bit. And when we look at it from a kind of a learning design point of view and a learning outcome point of view, it's not completely changing what we're trying to achieve. It's actually acting as a support structure and assisting what we're trying to get out of something rather than being the whole game in itself.
And you mentioned this concept of time, which I know the OECD report, April 2023, spoke about trying to foster a culture of lifelong learning in Ireland. The Scandinavian countries are the kind of doyens of this. The percentage in Ireland wasn't overly impressive, but certainly not at the bottom either. But what repeatedly comes up is this concept of time poverty. Now, how can we authentically foster a culture of lifelong learning in Ireland?
Well, that's a big
question.
big question. As Brian says, I don't want to denigrate my whole career here, but I suppose there's time can be viewed in different ways. So there's the time of the individual, but there's also the time of the employer and so on. So a couple of ways of looking at this. And just to say, you're right, we're bang average, I suppose, at EU level. That's where we are. We want to do better. What we do know is that the people who are highly educated, younger, less far from their education journey are more likely to participate in lifelong learning. So the older you are, the further away you get from the system, the less likely you are to engage. The other piece of that is if you are working in a smaller company, you're less likely to engage because you're less likely to be released. So these are sort of challenges that we know are out there, and there's a whole lot of different things we want to do. And I suppose the thing that I would say is that we don't want to sort of encourage people to go on a lifelong learning journey. We want to embed a sort of a culture of learning. Back to what you were saying, giving people the skill, giving people the viewpoint that, you don't just learn once, you continuously learn, and sort of valuing different kinds of learning. So valuing stuff that's outside the formal system, things like the recognition of prior learning, for example, so that people feel that, it's not all about being in a classroom, and sort of trying to break that down, trying to break down the barriers of time. One of the things that we were doing this year, we just got funding in the budget this year, is a sort of a voucher scheme for smaller enterprises so that the money goes into enterprises' pockets when they release their teams for training. And we're hoping that will get over some of that time barrier for small enterprises in particular. And then there's the sort of the time that it takes for you to find your pathway. And that's really, really key in this. So it's all about giving people, guidance and support and information. And there's a lot of stuff that we do there. Some of it is sort of geared towards the individuals. So we're at the moment piloting a scheme with SkillNet. It's all about coaching for careers that are kind of in danger of change. So that could be in danger of good change, so like green skills where there's going to be a lot more work, or in danger of change because of technological change, and people fear that a little bit, and trying to sort of give them the tools to overcome that fear. That goes back, I think, to what TJ was saying about digital literacy as well. So you need to be literate about what the challenge is in order to be able to address the challenge. And that's part of what we want to embed as well, lifelong learning, is sort of to give people the message that this is coming at you. You need to engage, whether you're an individual, whether you're a business owner, whether you're an educator, whether we're sitting as policymakers here. We all need to be engaged in this. We need to work together. And I think that's really, really important. So it's a really big question, and I could talk for 3 hours on it, but I better stop and let other people.
Fine, quickly, and then Daniel.
I just the way I approach it with organisations, which I know isn't relevant to everyone always focus on value for money, and I get that, and that's important, and return on investment is important. What people always look past is value for time. In that, if you're spending, if you've 10 participants on a program and they're spending 5 days out of the office, that's 50 days gone. What are you getting as an organisation back for that? And I always try and frame it in those terms, because the learning and productivity that you're gaining out of it is underestimated. Now it's very, very difficult. It's not a number you can put on it, or a specific, but if you can frame it in those terms, I think you can have a completely different conversation about the value of the skills that are taken on.
Daniel, and I have another question for you, but
Yeah, sure. It's just to pick up on this idea of time poverty, and whether or not we should take advantage of the new opportunities that AI brings and tentativeness around that. It's our obligation to make learning systems that are more efficient. Like, that is our duty of care to the students who come to us. And if there are tools and technologies that are available to expedite that, that's an obligation we have on us as institutions of learning or providers of teaching and training. It is so often the case that we'll have clients come to us or conversations, or we're getting feedback, that people are spending too long in the courses, or they don't feel like it's really an efficient use of their time, or actually, I'll be honest, half of the people on this course already know all the material, but they have to sit there and click through the buttons anyway. What are you doing about it? Like, part of your job as an educator, and if you want to think about personalized learning is often seen as meeting the learner where they are. Well, what if where they are is overworked, tired, they already know the content, and they don't particularly want to sit down for another 45 minutes clicking through material they've already mastered? You have to meet them there as well. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an obligation and a duty that we have within this industry.
I'm conscious of time and value for time. I know, Daniel, you've had a lot of experience working internationally with lots of different clients and partners. What lessons have you noticed or taken from that experience that perhaps could be relevant in the Irish context?
Yeah, so I suppose we're fortunate to do a lot of kind of international work in international projects. Two quick observations, because we are tight on time. I can see that myself. The first is the shift from policies that are protective against things like plagiarism or using AI tools to cheat. The shift from that perspective into something more ambitious and embracing of what the potential of AI. If you look on the world stage, there are national learning systems that are powered by AI all over the world, not here. Mm-hmm. So China, you have Shizhe. India, you have Diksha. Estonia, you have ebook. So we have these national learning platforms and our own kind of humble contribution to that, the student learning space in Singapore, which we power. There are national learning platforms that are already powered by AI globally. Part of what is required is a shift away from that apprehension around plagiarism and protection and more careful ambition. And then the last point, just to build on TJ's point again, this idea that you can transplant a learning system from one country to another. Like, you've raised the perspective from a moral perspective about including the voices that are going to be impacted by the tool. And while moral considerations are important, commercial considerations are also important. The most highly publicized failures of adoptions of systems like this all have at their root transplanting learning design solutions and digital pedagogies that work here and assuming, because the tech is so good, it will work here. Our experience has been very much to the contrary. Every country we work in, hugely configured, hugely specialized to meet their own learning styles, demands, pedagogies, requirements, the needs. So yeah, I'm in complete agreement, not only on the moral perspective about including the voice, but just from a pure numbers game, you have to be able to configure these solutions to meet local requirements. Woe betide you if you don't.
Okay, I'm very conscious that we are out of time. I had one other question that I want. Perhaps it could be a question for afterwards around the role of emotions. I've got a sticker on my laptop that says emotions are the highlighters of learning. And I'm interested. I'm such a nerd, and I'm interested.
You're in good company.
Yeah. And I'm just interested in the role of emotions when we introduce technology into learning. And could it be a massive advantage to stimulate our emotions, or is there some sort of tension there between the lack of human engagement? But that's for afterwards. But for now, can everyone please give a round of applause to Emma, TJ, Brian, and Daniel? Thank you very much.